Don't fuck up. Don't fuck yourself. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Rude Cooking School podcast. I'm your host, John Hauser III. And with me today is a guy. He's one of three owners of the Baltimore Spirits Company. His name's Max Lents. How's it going, man? How you doing?
Pretty good. Good to be here, John.
Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. We were introduced to each other through a friend of the podcast, Dave Seal.
Awesome.
Who, when I went to your when I went for a tasting at your place on Saturday, our bartender and I guess the general manager Greg there, when I was like, oh yeah, Dave Seal sent me, goes, oh, that asshole. And I was like, I'm at the right place.
Thanks, Greg.
No, he was awesome. He's going to be a big part of this because
Greg's dope. Yeah. But
that dude should teach everybody about drinking. Like, it was awesome. So, as I said before, you're one of the founders, one of the owners of the Baltimore Spirits Company. And I'm basically so we're just going to have a loose conversation about how you got into it, kind of what is it that you dig about, like we're just going to bullshit. By the way, you can cuss if you want. If you don't, that's fine.
Sure.
But there you go. Thank you. But I do, clearly. So when I first heard of your distillery, do you still call yourself a distillery? Yep. Okay. I think the first time I had ever tasted anything or ever seen anything was actually at the farmer's market.
It's funny how many people, as loud as we've tried to be through, social media, regular, traditional media, radio, podcasting, been on TV a million times, a million press releases. We were in City Paper back in the City Paper days. We had a cover story about rye coming back to Baltimore before we were open. Baltimore Sun a million times. We've been in the New York Times. More people hear about us through the farmer's market than everything else has been useless. The farmer's market is where everyone knows.
It's really funny. But I think you guys were one of the first to do it. It was
we helped get the law changed. We weren't allowed to sell in farmers markets till 2016. And that was our first big legislative win through our guild, which we helped found, the Maryland Distillers Guild. We're one of the founding members. And one of our first big legislative pushes was to give us a few more points of sale in farmers markets. We're that. So in 2016, we got that law changed and we got to join the JFX farmers market. I believe was the only one we were in, and only for the second half of that season in 2016, as the legislative session kind of goes through April, and then the laws come in officially changed and signed by the governor in midsummer. So did the second half of that market. Now we're in a bunch of them, and they change every year, but we're still in JFX and stuff. But yeah, we would have been one of the first because we were there right when it was allowed.
Yeah, and that's where I saw you, was at the JFX, because that's the one. It's because I live in Canton, so it's like JFX and Fells Point, and
Yeah, perfect.
But it was kind of like, oh, I'm a little hungover, and I get to do a little bit of a tasting in the morning. All right, let's do that. Get the creeping crud out of my throat or whatever, my brain. But I remember being like, holy shit, and then immediately went and got the gin.
Our first product, that may have been the only thing that we had there. Pretty close. Yeah,
it was one of the only things I tasted. That I remember. I think the Amaro or the Fernet might have been there.
We had some apple brandy stuff in 2016. I think.
Okay.
Maybe by 2017, the Amaro could have popped in.
It all runs together.
It does.
Because I go to the farmer's market a lot, and in 2016. Yeah, you had mentioned the City Paper. I used to write for them, so there was a lot of that sort of stuff going on, and I was writing farmers market articles for the Sun too, so it was all kind of crossing over at the same time, as food coverage in Baltimore kind of collapsed with the Sun kind of going down and the City Paper going out of business.
Yep.
Kind of hard to get space these days.
Glory days. I'll always miss the City Paper.
Oh, without a doubt. So how did you guys get started? Like,
Yeah. So founded by three dudes, myself, Ian Newton, and Eli Bregberg Smith. Ian was the first guy I ever brewed a beer with. He is a high school friend of mine. We grew up together down in Houston. I came home for a summer during college. He came home. He had learned to brew out in Arizona. We did a batch over Christmas break or something. And it was great. Then I went back to school, didn't think much more in it. The kind of craft beer scene had, maybe craft beer is not even the right word. Craft beer was just starting up, but also this is when people were just kind of rediscovering European beer. So people were drinking Belgian beer for the first time in forever and all this stuff. So right towards the end of college, my good friend at Goucher, which is where I went to school, Eli, wanted to start brewing beer, and he had started with a couple of his buds. So we started brewing together. We moved in to one of the, a classic shared post-college house together after. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to stay in Baltimore for a year. So moved into the city, moved in with Eli. We brewed a ton of beer in those days. There was a year where every house party in Charles Village was fueled by a couple of kegs of our homebrew floating around.
Yeah. Okay. So what year is this?
This is 2009, 10, something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So he is super into it, and he wants to do this professionally. So he at this time there weren't a lot of breweries in Baltimore, and it was very hard to get jobs in breweries, which is the opposite of what it is now. So to be a brewer, to get your foot in the door, you took anything you could get. So what he could get was an intro brewing position in Reno, Nevada. So he leaves.
Oh, okay.
Moves to
because like in Baltimore at that time, we got like Stillwater. We got
Stillwater was
Brewer's Art. But I know he didn't have a place.
Right. No, so
he was kind of brewing out of other places, right?
And he would have been brand new. So this is before Peabody Heights, before Union.
Yeah. It was basically just Brewer's Art, kind of.
I think Heavy Seas maybe had just kind of started up.
Yes.
Or maybe they had actually probably been around for a little while, but
they were around.
Like they were outside the city, and you couldn't just go get a job there. There's like,
but like you were saying, there wasn't multiple places where you could learn the
places
craft.
that just were hiring brewers all the time, and brewing is grunt work. And now it's, you want to be a brewer, you're going to have to cut your teeth for a couple of years. But back then it was like you just took anything. So he goes to Reno. At this point, I really want to do something creative in Baltimore. I've fallen in love with the creative scene. So I'm playing a little music around. I am walking dogs. I'm working at Guitar Center. Classic, 20s Baltimore stuff. But at some point, I think I'm going to open a venue in Baltimore, nightlife venue. So I decide that I should be working in the industry if I want to write a business plan about the industry. So I get a job at Joe Squared.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so I start as a busser just so I can work in the business while writing a business plan for a bar. I bus, and then I wait, and then I bartend, and then I end up doing some management at the North Ave location. I started at the other location.
So then friend of the show and personal friend of mine, Okan.
Oh, of course I do. Yeah. We go way back, even from before I worked there. So it was kind of during the Joe Squared days when my kind of business plan had stalled a little bit. Ian, my high school buddy with whom I brewed my first beer, has become an SAP. This I'm telling the story the most boring way, I think. But this
no. I find stuff like this amazing because right now you fucking guys are making beer. It's a million miles away. I mean, it's not a million miles away.
We're a million miles away.
But it kind of is because they're different things.
Yeah. So Ian has become an SAP consultant, and the way this works for him is his company basically puts him on a project, and the project can be anywhere in the United States. Or abroad sometimes. And it basically lasts for 6 months, and then they put him somewhere else. So 3 months, 6 months. But on the weekends, they fly him wherever home is. And since people move and stuff, essentially the deal is they'll fly you anywhere in the continental United States on the weekends, wherever you call home, or if you want to go to New York for a weekend, whatever. But the point is they don't ask every person in their giant company to move their entire life every 6 months because they know it's going to be project based. So it's just built into the cost of the whole thing. So he actually takes a longer term position in London and then is coming back from that. Doesn't really have a home base. had been staying in Phoenix, which was his college town, but kind of once out of that, doesn't have a lot he's going back there for. So I've got a room opening up in my now different, but another kind of shared house situation in Baltimore. So he's like, hey, maybe I'll just come live with you for a year. He moves into my house, continues to do his Monday to Friday, wherever it is in the country that he's doing it. And it's in the days where we're living together, which was supposed to be fairly temporary, that this distillery idea starts getting kicked around. I think he saw a small distillery out on the West Coast. This is really early in the craft distillery movement. So he just saw something small. And I think, like a lot of us, there hadn't been new distilleries on the block, across the country for 50 years. It was just the big couple out in Kentucky. That's where distilling happened, and nobody asked any questions. Well, once there was this just kind of whiff in the air that, hey, this might be like, it might be possible in the same way that nobody really brewed beer except for the big couple until 15 years before that. Like, there's kind of this logical next step. So we start looking into it. There's no prohibitive laws in Maryland. There are no distilleries in Maryland at the time. So I have learned about the history of Maryland rye. I know a lot more about it now, but I had been serving Pikesville in the bar and looked into Pikesville because it's named after Maryland town. So I had learned a little bit about the fact that, Maryland is this cultural home for rye whiskey. This is where it began, and it's not done here anymore. So I see this kind of cultural opportunity of like, hey, let's bring this thing back. It's near and dear to Baltimore. Like, we serve rye whiskey in this town. It's what we do. And nobody's making it here. So we start working on a business plan together, and including like hanging giant pieces of paper all over the living room walls and connecting things with yarn and balls and scribbling on it with Sharpie.
It's like you're trying to catch a serial killer.
It's 100%. It was a cop's basement. And we basically put this big business plan together. And
you don't know how to distill rye yet.
Well, what we also do is buy a little still online, a little copper still. And
Gotcha.
you get this little copper still, you get a note from the ATF that says something like, hey, we saw that you bought a still. We want you to know that we know you bought a still. You are not allowed to make hard alcohol in this still.
That is hilarious.
So we make some hard alcohol in the still.
Yeah, of course.
So we've read the books, right? I mean, we read everything. We're tasting whiskey every week. We're not just like not involved in the scene.
No, I got you. But like,
we're buying a ton of bottles. We're reading. We're checking up on the stuff that's new that people are doing. There's distilleries in Virginia that are popping up in Maryland stores. We're buying all that stuff. We're buying scotch. We're developing our palates and our knowledge. We're reading books on how to distill from the easy reading to some more scientific stuff. I'm like listening to business audiobooks because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So we're putting this business plan together, and and we're moonshining at the same time. We're moonshining.
This is like the montage part of the movie.
100%. Yeah. And we're wearing lab coats the whole time in this montage.
And you're running up a hill while you're testing whiskeys. You got.
That's right. We're
board on your back. Yeah.
100%.
Running through snow.
Someone's got a stopwatch.
Yeah. On the beach, you're all running, racing each other.
Slow motion.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So we put this business plan together, and honestly, it all felt a little bit like a pipe dream. I mean, I'm telling people, I'm working on opening a distillery now. And
they're all like, sure,
we're distilling little mason jars of test batches of stuff, everything from rye whiskey, because we know how to brew the beer. So we could brew a rye unhopped beer and distill that into kind of rye moonshine, and distilling brandy and putting beer into the still and stuff. And like just doing weird distillations to kind of get a feel for if we thought we had a talent for it, if we thought we enjoyed the process. You got to know those things.
Yeah, totally.
You might like the idea of things, but we wanted to get in it. So we do that, and we start. At some point, the business plan is done. We've been led around the city by the grace of some nice people who did us a lot of free favors, and we've kind of found a spot that the landlord is like, yep, like this you can have this spot. I'm looking for somebody to fill it. This was down in the original location, the Sisson Street location. I don't know if you ever partied at the BFF, the Broom Factory.
Yeah.
But that was our original space. And
oh, wow. Okay.
That space vacated. That was the original distillery. So we kind of have all the pieces there and there's nothing else to do. And then we start being like, well, I guess the next thing one does is you go to banks and you say, here's our business plan. Could we please have some money? And we didn't have a lot of money ourselves. So we do that. We've got, and this is the team. It's myself, it's Ian, and it's Eli coming in. Eli kind of joined a little later during the build out process. He at this point had become a professional brewer. He moved back to Baltimore and he was the lead brewer at Peabody Heights Brewery. So we were going to tap Eli to be the head distiller because he really understood industrial scale fermentation and how to warehouse and how to organize everything on a production schedule and stuff. So he was coming on as the head distiller. But we go to some banks, we get thrown out of a couple and laughed out of a couple. And, I had never been past the event horizon on a business plan before where it goes from like, and we're in our late 20s, we're kids. So, but at some point, we go to M&T Bank, which does more SBA business than any other bank in the state of Maryland. And the branch manager, Joe, at our local branch just loves this idea. He's just like, wow, you're going to brew whiskey here? And like, doesn't really understand it, and keeps at a whiskey brewery. And, but he really wants to make it happen. And he's like, we're going to make this happen. And so he somehow makes this SBA loan application make sense to the SBA. And I think we're doing things like leveraging equipment that we're going to buy as collateral against the loan, which is not really how collateral is supposed to work. Like,
because you don't own something.
None of us owned a house. My car was probably worth $600 at the time. Ian had an old, like a 90s Lincoln that wasn't worth any, we didn't have collateral. So like we put every penny we had into the business as founders equity. And then the bank gave us some money and we move in with sledgehammers one day. We're terrified of, so this is in Remington. And for those of you listeners who don't know the city, in Remington, the neighborhood association has a history of getting in the way of some businesses opening there. And oftentimes it's a problem with alcohol, especially back in these days. So this is 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago when we're moving in 2014. So I guess 10 years ago. So we're terrified. We kind of like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm a young kid. I'm 28, 29. So I'm like, I don't really know how to like politics into a neighborhood association and be like, hi, like this, I could do it a lot more professionally and like an adult now, but I kind of was like, let's just secretly build this thing.
Right.
And open it. So technically we're on like,
what's the worst they could do?
So we move in. First thing we do when we move in, you went to the BFF. So it was when we move into a space that is 4 apartments upstairs and it's a dance floor and it's a recording studio and it's a bunch of isolation vocal booths and drum booths and stuff, living room. And we need to turn it into one singular connected space. So first thing I do is tear out the drywall that's in front of a roll-up door. And I'm very luckily the roll-up door still rolls up, although it made just the sound of 1,000 demons when you rolled the thing up, and we never greased it, had no like rubber track on it anymore. And that's just the way it was. So we open it, we find a dumpster company that can, with about a 1/4 inch clearance on both sides, squeeze a dumpster into the space on top of the dance floor. We close the roll up door. I think that we started upstairs. And so I tore out a hole in the upstairs wall. So it kind of looked down into the dumpster. And then we just started tearing out walls and throwing it out the hole. It would all go down.
Cow.
We'd fill this dumpster up once a week. The guy would come, we'd roll the roll-up door, he'd take it out, put a new one in, we'd close it. Nobody had any idea what's going on in here. At some point, there's like a foam pit of used insulation that's like covered in like 2x4s with nails, and somehow a climbing rope has been slung over an I-beam that hung above it, and people were doing like Indiana Jones swings from side to side of this space over the death trap.
Because you would do, of course you would do that.
On day 2, I step on a nail, it goes right through my shoe into my foot. I mean, I still have nerve damage in one of my toes from power washing the space in January in the last steps and just getting soaking wet in like 30-degree warehouse.
Oh, yeah.
And just like tiniest bit of like frostbite that creeps up during winter. It still feels a little funny over there. So it's just a wild build out process. It's all DIY. It's like me and whichever one of my friends feels like showing up on a random Wednesday and cutting wires or using the sledgehammer. We like had to cut the electric at some point because we're like tearing the all. Eventually, there's wires hanging everywhere, and we need to start cutting them. So we just have to cut the whole panel. We cut the whole panel, and we just worked via headlamp for like a month, kind of sledgehammering towards the windows. And of course, these are like floating vocal booths. So every time you
Right.
the wall, you realize there's a second wall behind it.
Yeah.
Everything
Yeah.
is twice as thick as it's supposed to be. All the windows are covered and like boarded up for sound. So it just took forever. Learned how to use an angle grinder because at some point we found out that there was like an old industrial sheet of like steel grating that they had built walls around that was just in between these walls from back when this building was the city incinerator.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
like a whole bifurcation of the space via this metal grating that we have to cut out in chunks, borrow a friend's pickup truck to drive all the metal to the scrapyard to get our $600 for 20,000 pounds of steel that we brought there over the
Jesus.
6 months. So crazy stuff. And eventually towards the end of the thing, like I said, we were not business people, didn't know what we were doing exactly. But I find out that like, you can't just start a business to get your use and occupancy permit, the permit that the city says, okay, you're allowed to run a business in this space. You have to like submit all the architectural drawings of the plan. You have to get the fire department to sign off on your egress and all this stuff. And we've kind of built the space already. We installed our own, we like bought like steel emergency stairs to get up to the mezzanines and screwed them in. And I ran the electric, like ran all the outlets and stuff, learned how to do that, learned how to tie all the lights in and stuff. And at some, these were like 25-foot ceilings. We had a 25.5-inch ladder. So at some point, like not an iframe, just like barely touching the lip at the very top, going up there, dragging a corded hammer drill up so I could drill into the concrete ceiling and hang bolts in there to hang our lighting.
Very OSHA safe.
Between a ladder and a hard place, John. And it was, it was wild. So, but eventually once we kind of figure out what's between us and opening, I have to go hire an electrician who's willing to come in, look at what we did, draw it on a plan as if that was the plan.
Okay.
Did the same thing with architecture, plumbing. We like got a guy, our floor drain was a stairwell that we like concreted in and put a tube in. I mean, it was wild.
Yeah.
Very Baltimore. But we, limited resources and a couple of young dudes making things happen. So eventually we submit all the plans. We get the city they have whatever. We go back and forth a little bit. And eventually they were like, okay, fine, stamp. And then I come back the next day and I'm like, well, we're done. We'd like our final inspections now. So like we got the work permits with all these drawings, but the work had been done for a month.
Right.
So after they stamp, we just come back the next day and say, okay, we're done. Come and do the inspections, get the inspections, eventually get UNO, and start rocking and rolling. And then we were open. So there was this moment when the bank said yes, like that was the event horizon where I'm talking about. It's like, we went in as like, bright-eyed guys who had a fun idea, but there was no certainty in my mind that this thing was going to happen one way or another. And then we like shake hands with the guy and we walk out and we're like, oh shit, I got to go spend $200,000.
Okay. So from handshake to opening, how long are we talking?
It was probably about a year and a half. So
okay.
Call it a half year to get in the space because the space was still occupied.
Right.
But Doug, the landlord of the original space, had to sign a letter of intent that said, yes, they can do this here. Consider this their space. So you have to like sign the lease. Lease starts in November of 2014. That's the day I walk in the door with a sledgehammer. And then November of 2015, 1 year later, we're open and operating a distillery.
Holy shit.
Doing our first distillation a year later, almost to the day.
So, but as you're doing all the demo and all this like construction and shit, you're clearly like testing and tasting and, trying to figure out what your flagship's going to be. And
right. So we have some ideas on the rye. We've really tried to inform a lot of our tastes based on what we enjoyed drinking. Mm-hmm. So, in the early days of craft distilling, and this is not to disparage anybody, but there was this theory that you could make, you could make whiskey taste old by using a small barrel. Um,
Okay.
and so a lot of new distilleries were doing this, and they were releasing whiskey that was 6 months old that, was oaked as if it had been in barrel for 5 years, because you get more surface area to liquid in a small barrel. And so this was
Gotcha.
in the original business plan, is like, we'll be selling whiskey in 6 months. This is a new thing that everyone's doing. And apparently it's awesome. Well, we drink a million whiskeys. And at some point we look at our each other and we're like, have we ever are there any of those whiskeys that come out of these small barrels that we think are what we want to do, like are great whiskeys to us? And the answer was no. So we abandoned that and started, we said, all right, 2 years minimum, full size barrel. That to us seems to be the only way that makes sense. So we go that direction. I mean, we're trying to inform all of our decisions based on the kind of aesthetics that have spoken to us during the entire research phase, which, research including a lot of tasting and drinking and talking stuff. So a lot of it's informed by single malt Scotch, which is cool because the original rye whiskey distillers of Maryland would have been the Scottish and the Irish settlers who were doing it, the farmlands out here. And so a lot of the kind of heritage methods they brought over from Scotland and Ireland, where this was like pot distilled rye, and that's what we do. So, there's a lot of kind of historic accuracy or historic influence for what we do here. And we don't make rye whiskey in kind of a modern, not only a modern industrialized way that like a big distillery would, but even small craft distilleries, most of them are not doing what we do. We operate a little bit more like a small Scotch distillery would.
You use like a giant pot still, right?
We use we have 2 pot stills, but it's double copper pot distillation. We don't have a hybrid, so it's not a pot still with a little column on it. It's really, really old school, inefficient, high character distilling.
Okay. And okay, so what was the first thing you put out? The rye?
Well, the rye didn't come out till 2018 because it had to sit in barrels.
Sure.
So whiskey's a weird business because you have to make stuff that you don't get to sell for a number of years. So
right.
A lot of the whiskey we're selling this year, we distilled in 2020.
Because it sits, right.
And the whiskey that we're distilling this year, we might not sell till 2028, 2030. So it's a whole weird thing. But the first thing that came out was Shot Tower Gin.
Okay.
Thing we developed over a 2-year span in my kitchen. So we have not altered the recipe for Shot Tower Gin since it came out of our 10-liter still in my kitchen. So all we did was we were like, okay, this was 10 liters and we used 1.5 grams of X ingredient. Now we're doing 250 gallons of it. So we just did the multiplication, literally scaled it up 1-to-1, put it all in there and hope for the best. And luckily, our experience on our small little moonshine still scaled up with us. And the gin that came out was really wonderful. I'm not saying we haven't gotten any better at our jobs. We certainly have, and we continue to do so. But the recipes have remained the same. It's really our technical ability that's gotten better more than the recipes did.
I really like the gin too, because it's not a British gin. Like it's not a lot of pine tree and juniper and all that stuff. It almost reminds me more of like Japanese gins, kind of, like it's
I describe it as an American dry, which would generally be citrusy and floral. Yeah. And the Japanese gins, depending on which ones you drink, I think they have styles of both. But yes, I generally think of a London dry and English style gin as that kind of very foresty, pine tree, Christmas tree kind of herbaceous center, whereas American dries tend to be more fruity, citrusy, floral. So jasmine flower is our big floral note. We use green tea in there as well, which is kind of gives it a very soft. That's a lot of the Shot Tower identity is actually wrapped in the green tea and then curacao orange peel. Yeah,
and like we're big. My wife and I are big gin drinkers, and it's funny because we weren't originally, and we went to Barcelona like 10 years ago, or no, 11. No, Christ, it's almost 15 years ago now. It was before our son was born. And we were going to a restaurant and they were packed and they're like, you're going to have to wait like an hour. We're like, yeah, okay, fine. Cause we wanted to go to this place.
Yeah.
And they're like, just go across the street and we'll come and get you. And we're like, what? And they're like, yeah, there's a bar across the street. We'll just come and grab you. That's what we do. And I'm like, okay. So we go in, and it's a Hendrix bar. Like, all they serve basically are just Hendrix. And we're like, oh shit, we don't really drink gin, but fuck it, went in Barcelona. And what we got was this giant goblet of, it was gin, lime juice, rose water, and cucumber water. And it was fucking life changing. I was just like, holy shit, this is incredible. And the whole time, so the bar was clearly from like made in the 20s or 30s. They still had the little tiles, and it was all white and really fucking cool. And the soundtrack was like, really cool, sort of jazzy, with hip hop beats and shit things. But you could also hear like, because they had these little clippers that they would pull the zest off of the lime. So all you would hear is
staple remover.
Yeah, it's kind of what it sounded like. And I'll never forget that. And then, yeah, from that point on, gin maniacs.
Well, what's interesting about the 20s and 30s?
What's that?
Is that was prohibition in the U.S.
Well, yeah.
A lot of very talented career bartenders, because the U.S. was massively into cocktail culture pre-prohibition. A lot of very talented bartenders moved to Europe so they could continue their trade. And that's when a bunch of American bartenders invented a bunch of classic drinks, because they're dealing with champagne regularly for the first time, and a bunch of Italian Amaro and different. Wow. So you see,
I never even thought about that. That's really
there's
cool.
A bunch of famous drinks that were invented in Europe during Prohibition by American bartenders, because they had all these new ingredients. So there's like a whole cocktail culture intermingling of cultures that began in the 20s and 30s. So the bar really could have been from then, and that would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it's still there. It's called Gij. It's XIX. So like how Barcelonians.
I won't try.
Yeah, it's Gij, I think. But yeah, totally life changing. And like now I'm just like a maniac for gins. And I remember the first time trying your gin, and it was like one of those things where it was like, okay, let's give it a shot, like literally. And then you taste and you're like, oh fuck, this isn't like some garbage, because at the time there was a lot of places popping up, and especially beer breweries. And you would just try stuff and be like, okay, thanks. And then just politely walk away. But I remember that at that time going like, oh shit, I got to get a bottle of this.
Yeah, it's tough to fight that battle. That's something that we run into, and something that I understand from a consumer sake. I don't immediately trust a distillery I've never heard of, because there is really I think there's some sifting to find the diamonds in the rough, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But our kind of first concern was always quality. I mean, we never released a moonshine because we just don't like a white whiskey, because we don't feel like that was a finished version of our product. Our entire kind of philosophy. We're really bad business people, is what it comes down to.
Come out as your first thing, though, right?
We sacrifice being a good business in pursuit of a quality or memorable or special spirit all the time. And it's I think we'd be slapped in the face by Warren Buffett or any accomplished businessman a million times since we started this thing. But it makes me very happy when somebody with a lot of doubt tries it and kind of sees that something special is going on. So I love to hear it.
But what you're saying is like your quality control gets in the way of your business decisions a lot. I mean, and that's good though. Like there has to be quality control.
It's true. And it's not just, it's quality control, and it's also, you can get away with a lot of stuff if you push the marketing the right way, but we just never try to do that stuff.
So what was the first rye to come out? Was it Epoch?
Yeah. Epic Rye launches in,
Is that how you pronounce it? You're saying Epic?
We consider both acceptable, because generally that word can be said both ways. We like Epic because the word can be said that way, and it's a better double entendre,
Right. Okay.
So Epic Rye.
Hey, look, man, I get it. My podcast is called Rude. That's spelled ROUXDE. So yeah.
Launches St. Patrick's Day 2018 as a 2-year rye, and the very first bottles. So we we pre-sold one barrel because we needed to stay open. That was like a something that about a year in, we were like, we're almost out of business. We have this whiskey down. Maybe if we ask the public if anybody wants to pre-buy bottles, they'll do it.
Oh, okay, I got
Yeah.
you.
We sold out the first barrel in like a day, and then everybody waits for a year. We launch it, so we have two barrels at that point. There's two barrels that become ready in March. We empty, we bottle, all this good stuff. We take two of the bottles, two of our precious bottles, and send them off to the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, which is the biggest competition in the United States.
Okay.
And the very first bottles from the very first barrels, the very first rye distillation won the double gold at San Francisco, which we're not the only people. Plenty of people have won it, but it is still a pretty big deal. And the fact that our very first bottles did it, we felt like that was an auspicious beginning, and it was a nice indication that we were doing something right and had our heads in the right places. So that was a special moment for us for sure. And we've won double gold 4 times now there. So
What does that do for putting you on the map?
Well, not enough.
Oh, really? I mean,
yeah, it's you think over time, I think the accumulation of meaningful awards like that one does move the needle for you, and certainly gets people asking questions. But of course, as more distilleries open up, and we used to compete against 100 ryes in the category, and when we won, I think we were one of 9 that got double gold that year, and it was like Knob Creek 12 year, and it was a bunch of huge brands, old whiskeys, and that was awesome. And I think we won it last year for Reserve. Same situation. First bottles of Reserve that came out won it, which was really cool. But I think there were like 50 double golds in the category out of like 2,000.
Yeah.
So it's a massively different kind of thing now than it was back then even. But I think even back then it was just starting to get crowded enough to where winning a double gold didn't automatically mean you were fielding calls from nationwide distributors being like, who cares, But it still matters when winning them on regularly. People do start to notice. So we still submit.
And okay, so and is that like your goal at that point? Like you're like, okay, we got to get national distribution. Like,
no, we couldn't. We didn't have the whiskey for it. We still don't, to be perfectly honest. The company that made the whiskey we're selling this year was 4 years smaller than we are now, and we're still not a big company. So we're trying to figure out how to make whiskey for the 2028 version of us, which ideally is a lot bigger than we are now. So
that's really interesting. Like to like the building of it, the growing of it, right? Like, yeah. And especially since it's gotta age.
And we want it to get older. Like that when I say
right.
2028, like some of the whiskey we make this year, I promise you won't be sold. I mean, ideally for 10 years. Ideally, there is already whiskey barrels that we have that'll be 10 when they come out. So it is a tricky thing. It's basically a bad business. I think the way to get into it is to have a lot more money than we did. But we do what we can. We do feel like if we can stick around, we're doing special stuff, and eventually that'll matter. Mm-hmm. We'll just there'll be an opportunity we can seize at the right time. So we feel like we're in a good spot right now in terms of being in a good position for that. And we do, one of our founding principles, what we wanted to do, we opened this place in a valley next to the dump like swinging over an insulation pit of nails. Like we started very small, very bootstrapped, 0 outside equity. And just a couple of people who were willing to work every day for years to get this thing going. But at the same time, one of the literally in like the founding, these aren't the core values, but there's like a mission statement. Like the mission statement is we want Baltimore Spirits Company to be the premier rye whiskey distillery on the East Coast. And we still want that. And that is a journey, but that's the goal. That'll be the moment where we feel like we've done what we set out to do.
How do you feel about your product?
I love the product.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not only do I love it as is, I also think that because of our distillation style, our spirit, I think, can also responds to age really well. Like we think that, the 4 year is already a double gold winning spirit. The 2 year was a double gold winning spirit. Like the quality of the actual juice is amazing. But as it gets older, we are also realizing that like the ceiling is incredibly high for what we're doing. So we feel really good about it. And we do feel like in general, in whatever age category we are existing at a time, we're going to compete with the best of the best. And part of that's because none of the big distilleries are gonna do whiskey the way we do it. Nobody's
Right.
going to put up with these pot stills, and there's a handful of distilleries around the country that do something like what we do, but there's very few and far between. It is a labor of love, and our Eli, our head distiller, is a massively talented guy, and has really become, I think, one of the best distillers on the East Coast, especially on a system like ours. So he's massively talented and a fantastic guy. The
So
whiskey that's in the barrel, amazing. Yeah.
just to describe for the listeners, when you think of like a still, like an old timey ass, big ass copper pot still that with the big bottom, and then it tapers up to the top and then goes over. That's what you're talking about. Not
Yes.
a giant column still
Which
that
is a big tube
continuously
with
feeds.
windows. Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, and if the listeners want to imagine a column still, it's a giant vertical tube with a bunch of windows in it.
Right.
That would be the other thing you think of when you think of still. Yeah.
So when you see like how did this get made or whatever on TV, how it's made, when they usually show like, and we're going to show you how whiskey's made, it's always a big production thing that's fucking like 100 feet tall almost, like they're just holds massive amounts of booze or spirit that continuously sort of feeds on itself.
Continuously feeds, and they're kind of inherently different. I don't believe there's a right or a wrong answer.
No, not at all.
So I'm just prefacing.
Every brewer I've ever made said the hardest thing in the world to do is make Coors Light. Because you gotta
100%.
fucking make it perfect every time.
Right.
And it's got, even though it is what it is, you got to do it.
100%. And there are some of my favorite whiskeys in the world are done on a column still. All the Jim Beam and the Buffalo Trace, all the Sazerac stuff, like all these whiskeys that people rightfully, clamor over. Mostly all of that is column. So it's not like it makes bad spirit, but inherently different. Whereas a column,
yes,
you kind of choose from where on this vertical column you're going to pull your spirit. And essentially you pull a very focused spirit from that exact spot the whole time. And it's like a one note. You get to choose your note and you're like, I think this is the perfect thing right here. And you pull that and that's your whiskey, the whole thing. In a pot still, it's batch distillation. So it's not continuous. You do a batch and then you move on to the next batch. But at the beginning of the batch, where you start collecting, it tastes very different than it does in the middle, which tastes very different than it does at the end. And essentially you're pulling from kind of some of it from the entire column. So you don't pick one moment of flavor profile. What you do is collect a giant aggregate of kind of hundreds of flavor profiles over time. And that becomes the aggregate of those flavor profiles become your spirit. So it is inherently you collect a more complex flavor profile. So it's denser. I think it's pretty easy to fuck up and get bad stuff on there. And, flaws in the fermentation often become flaws in the final spirit if you have flaws in fermentation. So, so you don't want that.
And for people who are listening and you're not understanding kind of what we're saying, a spirit is the neutral, it's clear. It's not going to taste like rye or any kind of whiskey. It's just it is
the unaged,
alcohol.
Unaged spirit that will go into barrel and turn into whiskey over time. Yeah.
But starting with that pot stilled neutral spirit is the beginning of like the journey that does become you're already starting with like an esoteric sort of flavor profile.
Yes. Right? 100%.
Yeah.
So a different kind of thing. And anyways, our spirit, there's not going to be I think we have our own little niche that's so complicated and difficult to do. We don't really have to worry about it being stolen by somebody that's going to like take over our business, take right. Or something. So what we do is very much our own thing. So I feel good about our future. I feel like we've got just a huge amount of fantastic whiskey in barrels, and more people will try it every day, and we get great response, and the right people do pay attention to us. We're on the right people's radar. So, I think we're still one step at a timing towards our goal here, but that remains the goal. And we feel like we're on our way. We're certainly a lot closer than on day one. So,
yeah. So, okay. I was lucky enough to go and do a tasting over the weekend, and I've had I think a couple of your products before, but uh, I was able to taste a good amount on Saturday. Uh, and I was blown away. Like me and my wife went. And by the way, your whole crew is fucking awesome there. Like Greg was great and so insightful and, you know, bullshitted with us and taught us. And it was a really, really fun experience to go through sort of your body of work and compare and contrast. And it was really a really good time. Like if anybody's like you know, a fan of just tasting different kind of whiskeys and ryes and gins and, you know, all that stuff, I highly recommend going to your place. We weren't able to do the tour, but we're actually going to come back for that. Like and my wife has been planning on going there anyway because my son takes drum lessons right next
nice.
to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he takes drum lessons at the music place. But and I'm going to say this, and this isn't meant to be like snarky or weird or anything, but like the overall taste profile, and I've had this in other really good like spirits, is there's almost like a dusty flavor. And I don't know what that is, and I'm assuming that's the pot, but like, and I don't mean it to sound like it's old. I mean there's a clarity of flavor that has this overarching flavor profile that I can only like describe as dusty, but it's awesome. Like it's
there's a lot of places that could come from. I mean, flavor profiles in whiskey are a bottomless pit, right? Because people will take freshly trodden blackberries under rubber shoes.
Right.
You know, like people get really specific, and all that stuff is really viable. When it comes to that flavor, sometimes I get like a sawdusty kind of a note.
Yeah.
I usually attribute
it's almost spicy, dusty.
Yeah, I attribute a lot of that to the oak. You know, like it's in actual wood.
Well, I tasted the toasted thing, and that was fucking bananas good. Like I've never tasted a whiskey in my life that was almost like drinking liquid wood. It was fucking like when we got to that, I was just like, get the fuck out of here with this. I don't even know what I'm tasting right now. It's so crazy.
That's a special bottle. Yeah, I love it.
It was really cool. Like, as just like, you know, because whiskeys can really sort of pound your palate, right? You know, like after a couple, you might be shot out of the water already. But we got to that, and it was such a weird reprieve and such a flavor flip, you know, because everybody wants that like hard, you know, caramelization, you know, like that sort of like really hard thing. And then to get like a really toasty, like a genuinely like that's like for the people who just really like them. They just really take the time to with their marshmallow, and they don't blacken it.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And it was so fucking cool. Like my wife and I were just sitting there like, what the fuck is this? It's so weird.
So funny. That's exactly, that's how I describe. People are always like, well, aren't all barrels toasted on the inside? And I'm like, no, they're charred.
Yeah.
And I describe it as it's like a marshmallow. Like whiskey's required, a rye whiskey is required to be aged in a charred barrel. So it starts in the charred barrel. A toasted barrel, which we move it into, it's as if you held your marshmallow outside the fire. It never lit on fire. It just turns nice golden brown, but never black. That's what is on the inside of a toasted barrel. And it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. I mean, it was singularly like compelling, like noteworthy. And one of those things you're just like, what is this? It was really interesting. There you go. Yeah. You got a bottle of it right there. It's fucking awesome.
You know, always within arm's reach.
So, okay, I'm going to go across some of our favorites. So the toasted was it. You know, the reserve we had was fucking awesome. You know, I'm kind of looking through my photos now. You know, we did the regular shot tower. We did the Pachuga, which was interesting. My wife was in love with and I was really surprised with this one. She really liked the Szechuan Baltimroe.
Yeah.
Where she was like, holy shit, I want to make every drink with just this. And I was like, really? That's the one? She was like, I don't know what it is about it. It was some comment. Because another thing that we found over in going to Europe a couple times is Amaros, right? Like they're so, when you think of Amaro, a lot of people just think of like one flavor profile, but they're so varied. It's fucking bananas.
Yeah.
And that was one where she was like, holy shit, this is my jam. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's nothing there is nothing like that Amaro, I don't think, on the market outside of Mexico. Amaro means bitter in Italian. So for those listeners that don't know what these are, they're generally liqueurs, meaning they have a sugar content and they're somewhat sweet. There is some level of bitterness to them with some very traditional bittering roots or barks or herbs. And they kind of spring from the medicinal history of spirits, where if your stomach was upset, you'd drink something bitter to calm your stomach. If you couldn't sleep at night, you drink something bitter before you go to sleep. And if you were having marital issues, you'd drink something bitter.
Right.
Just cure all for everything. And then they were just started being incorporated into cocktail culture and just general drinking culture. They started in the Amalfi Coast in Italy. Now they're kind of made all over the world. So this Szechuan Amaro does have some traditional bittering agents in them. Now we use some very mild bittering roots and herbs in there. There's some orris root and some galangal root, which is bitter, but is a little.
That's the flavor. That's the flavor that busted through for me. And even before I read the thing, I was like, this tastes like galangal. Or
yeah, it does.
And then read the thing, I was like, holy shit. Because I was like, ginger? Like,
yeah. And then there's some, and then we use Szechuan peppercorns in there, which are, Szechuan peppercorns are part of a flower. They're not a real peppercorn out of a pepper. So they don't really carry capsaicin. They're not spicy in a traditional sense.
Right.
They have a numbing anesthetic quality. So you can get like a little bit of a mouth buzz going on. It's not really intense in that spirit. And
no, not at all.
Some mace. So there's some like baking spice stuff, but it's a really balanced blend. Full credit to Eli on that. Most of our recipes are collabs, but we do have our own solos in the lineup. And the Szechuan Amaro is Eli's baby, and it's really, really good.
Yeah, it was cool because I was just like, oh wow, like, because I've had the Fernet before. I know that was one of the other ones that I've had, and I really like that because it's, again, not bust you over the head with that like super deep, weird, minty.
It's right. It's more of a fresh mint profile than like a mentholic Vicks Vapor Rub profile. Yeah.
Right. Which I appreciate. It's more complex. Like you can taste different notes. It's not, it's a chord. It's not a note. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing.
Speaking of Greg, that's his cocktail ketchup. He just puts it in all the cocktails.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, one of the things that we had that he just let us taste because he was just making it in front of us was the welcome punch.
Yeah.
That thing's fucking bananas. And you give that away to people. Like, sure. I was like, what the fuck are you doing giving this away? This is incredible. It's so good.
Yeah, it's amazing. The welcome punch is great. That's definitely a Greg creation. It's a spin on some old punch recipes, but tea and citrus, usually a couple different Amari, the set, like maybe the Fernet and the Szechuan.
Yep.
And then
I got the recipe right here.
Yeah.
It's the Shot Tower Gin, it's the Fernet, it's the Szechuan. White Tea Company, BSC Punch Blend. It's cherry syrup, lemon, orange, house-made ginger bitters, and freshly grated ginger. And I watched him fucking grate fresh ginger because that's the thing that I was like, are you actually doing fresh ginger into that thing? He's fresh nutmeg.
Nutmeg,
like,
Yep.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, man, fresh nutmeg. And I'm like, the fuck out of here. But
fresh nutmeg is my favorite garnish, so it's in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's so good. And when it's fresh, it makes or break, like you can always like just a little too much instantly makes it too much, right? Yeah. But like it does make a giant difference. And I mean, I watched him, he was precise with like making stuff, little taste, needs a little bit of, and it was really cool to watch him make that. And then to taste it after he's done, I was like, wow, that's awesome. It was really good. Yeah, I mean, if you're listening and you're in the Baltimore area, go for that, for Christ's sake. It was so good. And then my favorite overall, besides the toasted thing, was the skeleton gin.
All right, Eli has a hit, and now I have a hit. Skeleton Gin is mine, which is nice. It's awesome. It's a Shot Tower Gin. It was a huge passion project for me, the original one, and it took a long time. Dialed it in my kitchen. So not only is it like, do I have a deep emotional tie with it from when it came and like who I was and what we were trying to do, but also it is. I still truly believe it's one of the great American dries being distilled here. It's very in the pocket though, and it's like really firmly in the category of American dries. It's accessible, makes great classic cocktails. So it was always one of these things where I never was really sure if we'd ever add to the Shot Tower Gin lineup because I knew I needed something that I thought had that same kind of quality aspect where I really believed it was special, but also had a severely different identity. So it didn't step on toes. And I love American Dry. So I was just never really sure what that was going to be. But I just got a little whiff of an idea at some point on a trip. And I came back to the distillery being like, I think I have an idea for a gin. I don't really know what it's going to be like, but I want to use eucalyptus and aloe vera as kind of the core botanicals besides the juniper in this thing. And so we broke out the little test still, which we still use. We bought a second one because we still like to do test batches in our little tin.
That makes sense. That's
so we use it in the distillery now on a hot plate and stuff.
Does it have a name?
No, the big stills have names.
Okay, what are the stills names? One of them's got to be Chester Copperpot, right? Like
no,
I'm sure somebody.
Stilly the Kid, which is the original, and he's the
okay.
One. And then there's Still Smith is the big one because of his debut album, Big Stilly Style. So
my God, I just got the Still Smith. Jesus Christ.
So those
Getting jigger with it.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
So anyway, I wrote the recipe and I wrote it. I didn't just use aloe vera, eucalyptus, juniper. I like thought about the thing. I wanted it to be lime focused for the citrus instead of orange or lemon, which are way more common in gin. It ended up being something like I think it's a 12 or 14 botanical gin, which is pretty complex.
You know what this thing that busted out to me that I was like, there's something in here and I have no idea what it is. And then I started reading about it. I was like, it's fucking avocado leaf.
Yeah.
Like that was the thing that I was tasting that I was like,
yeah,
holy shit. Like that, where you just have that thing in your head and it's just scratching at you.
Yeah. Because why would you look for avocado leaf in there?
Right. But I know what that tastes like. And it was driving me crazy in like my Rolodex of flavor.
That's awesome that you pulled that. Yeah. So it's a really weird gin. And if you consider regular Shot Tower to be an American dry, this one would fall into the amorphous category of contemporary botanical gin, which basically means this shit doesn't taste like a normal gin.
Right.
Now there's more juniper in that one than there is in Shot Tower, even though you might think the opposite, but it's because the eucalyptus and the aloe vera were so bold that you had to really up to like make sure you were keeping it in the gin category. Because I don't really believe in gin that doesn't have juniper notes. Like that is the
it's got a
legal defining definition for gin. So ours are definitely gin, but it's its own animal. It makes really cool cocktails, but it's like not what you would use for like a traditional Negroni, and maybe not a martini, although a cup of cold gin, as long as it's good gin, is pretty good.
No, my wife was like, I've never really, tried gins by themselves too much. She's like, this I could drink straight.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, me too. This is really good.
It's nice, but it makes awesome lime centric cocktails, Southsides, gimlets, I think.
Yeah. Which awesome. I then had later after we did like sort of the tastings. My wife had the peanut butter jelly time, which was fucking crazy to taste. And that was really good.
That's my favorite drink on menu.
And then I had one of the gin cocktails, and that was fucking awesome. Nice. Like they mix so well. And I mean, it's a testament to you guys. Like they're great as is, but also play well with others, which a lot of sort of quote unquote artisanal things don't, because they're so trying to be singular that it gets kind of lost when it plays with other stuff or overpowers.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, credit to Greg. So Greg designs the cocktail menus and, with input from the other bartenders. But I do think you have to make it work with anything.
Right.
They're simple or not. but our cocktail program is awesome. So, start with great spirits, and I hope I make Greg's life easier than giving him a bunch of bad stuff.
So okay, he told me a story that there's a barrel of something that you guys still won't even let him taste
That's
because
true.
because you guys don't think it's good enough or something.
It's not just not good enough, John. It's not good.
And you're just waiting for that one day where it comes around.
I don't. It's not going to come around.
And it's a brandy. Am I remembering that correctly?
It's a single malt rye whiskey.
Okay.
The first take at you only using malted rye, and the fermentation went wrong. The yield was weird. Just everything. It couldn't have gone more wrong. But at some point we had it, and it went into a barrel.
I love that you still have it. You're like, fuck it. One of these days it's gonna
There's
come
no
around.
reason to take it out of the barrel. I mean,
well, you can redistill it.
No. There's no fixing it. It wasn't the distilling. It wasn't the distilling. So it could be the world's best 20-year whiskey one day, or it could just never see the light of day. I do think it's gotten better.
Okay.
But
so there's hope.
Deep down in its soul, even if you try it now, it's the oldest thing we have. It is straight up an 8-year rye whiskey now.
And now it's just the mascot of the distillery, basically.
Yeah, deep down in its soul, it's not good. Like you can taste it now and you're like smelling, you're like, oh, hey, wait, there's a lot of like stuff going on. It's like, it's better than it was. But I'm not sure it will ever turn a corner that takes it. But you just leave it in there. What's the point? What are we?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Just keep coming back every now and then. Like, how you doing? You're still awful. All right, see you in a couple of years.
Yep, that's how it goes. That's literally the only thing we put in barrel. We were certain it was bad. Like
that's awesome, though.
Yeah. So we're not mistake free. That one is a funny one though.
I love that story though. Like you're just like, you know what? Let's see what happens. I mean, but that you never know.
You never know. That's the thing is like in the whiskey game, you could think one thing in 10 years is going to teach you something else. So we'll see.
Okay. I got a couple questions left.
Yes.
One, what's your favorite? What's the favorite thing that you guys make of yours? Like, what do you go to all the time?
I wouldn't trade the rye whiskey for anything else. I mean, only because I've answered that so many times does it seem like an easy answer coming out of my mouth. I love our spirits. I love Shot Tower Gin. Like if I had nothing to do with the company, I would say Shot Tower Gin would be in my bar. And I would be drinking a lot of it. Like I love the original Shot Tower Gin. And Skeleton is really special, and there's really just nothing. There's no substitute for it.
Yeah, it's singular. Yeah.
Szechuan Amaro is amazing and really cool. We do the smoked apple brandies. And I think both of them are really fun and kind of unlike. There's once again kind of nobody else is doing anything like it. But the Pachuga version in particular, I think if you were like into artisanal mezcal and you had a collection of nicer bottles, I think that one stands up to them and has a place in any one of those collections. So I think
and just to let everybody know that Pachuga is a spirit that's distilled with a ham in it.
Right? A Maryland country ham. Yeah. It's kind of a bone-in prosciutto.
Yeah.
30 pound. I guess this year it's like a 17-pound ham hung in the still.
And there are notes of ham in there. I mean,
there are. It's got like a
very much there.
Yeah, it also has wild American persimmons, wild pawpaw, wild black walnuts. It's really, really fun.
Stuff that's local. Like
native to Maryland is kind of a celebration of a Maryland harvest, and it is a style of spirit that is traditionally done in Oaxaca, and it's a celebration of any one of those mezcal farms' local harvest. So
that's cool.
In Oaxaca, it might be rice and pineapple, and most traditionally raw turkey breast tongue in the still. Wanted to stay true to that project and do it about our own locality. So that's kind of how we got there. But when it comes down to it, the rye whiskey, it's culturally significant for the city of Baltimore. It's why we started the company.
Yeah, that's the thing that captured your imagination from the beginning.
Yeah, and I think whiskey is incredibly difficult to do. It takes not only a lot of skill, but also perseverance and patience and a lot of the long nights and the stresses we've endured and the kind of 1,000 times we've almost closed, we're in pursuit of that project really at its core. So there's like a real emotional resonance and tie for me with Epic. And if we ever did close, the audit of the company may find a couple of barrels missing by the time they got me out of there. So
I do have, okay, from the beginning of making, like, it's called like a mash, right?
yeah.
So from the beginning of making the mash to the actual spirit coming out, getting put into the barrels, what's your timeline on that?
So I'll give you the current timeline. It used to take a lot longer when we just had one still, but now we may mash on a Thursday. So that means you mill the grain, you cook it in water, you transfer it into a fermenter, you pitch your yeast, and you clean all the equipment. That on Monday, so it'll ferment on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. On Monday, we'll take that 1,000 gallons of fermented mash, pump it into the stripping still, and we'll strip it. That takes about 8 hours, give or take. And that will give us the low wines, which is basically a not complete product. But we've stripped it from 1,000 gallons of mash to 250 gallons of harder but not hard alcohol.
Right.
So we've done a single distillation. We'll take that the next day on Tuesday. This is not always how it happens. Sometimes there's days between, things sit in tanks, whatever. But
Sure.
we can move it the next day into Still Eat a Kid and do the spirit run, which takes longer, takes something more like 14 hours.
Wow.
And at the end of that day, we have our white whiskey, the raw spirit. And the next day, we can put that into barrels, and that will end up being about 2 barrels of whiskey. So call it Thursday to Wednesday if everything's really tight to get 2 barrels.
And are you guys making 2 barrels a week?
Depends. We can do more because we can also be running both stills at the same time.
Okay, I gotcha.
We can do a mash Thursday and Friday.
But
and
what I'm saying is you're constantly making.
Depends on the year. So we spent a couple of years making 20 barrels a month. So we were quite a bit more than 2 barrels a week. And that was basically to stock the warehouse. The warehouse is essentially at capacity right now. So we make a little more than we empty these days, but it kind of ebbs and flows with our depletions. And the next step will either be getting an offsite warehouse, but also maybe trying to figure out a funding program to scale. We would need to be able to scaling production again to a wholly different level. So we have about 600 barrels right now, which is where we will generally hover until we decide on what the next phase of this looks like.
Right.
And that would be, whenever that happens, is when you'd see a substantial change in what our production schedule looks like.
And when did you guys move into the Union Collective? How long have you been there?
28
couple years. Okay. Oh, that long. Oh shit.
Yeah,
okay.
we were part of the founding businesses that went in. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's a really nice space. I'd been in there once before and just had a cocktail because I had gone to the guitar store because I'd never been there.
The cocktail room didn't open until 2021.
Okay.
We had to get a law changed to let us do cocktails. So that was our big legislative initiative in 2019. We got the law changed in 2019. We used to have our tasting bar in the distillery in the production area, and you could just come in and get little tastes.
Right.
And you would do little tastes and buy a bottle, and that was the experience. Then we got the law changed, and then in 2020 into 2021, we built out the cocktail room in a much more professional manner.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean,
that I described earlier.
Yeah, no, it was really nice. I had DJ in the corner and fucking, sitting there drinking some of the cocktails. The door was open.
Yeah.
Wind was blowing. It was a nice day.
Was there a DJ there?
Yeah.
Oh, you went during the
Saturday
Hootie listening party.
Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. It was awesome. Like, it was a good experience. So,
cool.
Yeah. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate all your time and, explanation of this stuff. I do have one last question for you. So everybody that comes on the podcast gets this question.
Hit me.
You know tomorrow you're going to die. Doesn't matter how you die. Could be rabbits eat you. Could be, I don't know. One of the, you drink that drink and it finally comes back at you and just takes you out. You know you're going to die tomorrow. You have one meal left. It can be anything you want, as big or as small. But also you can add drinks and dessert if you want. Okay, go for it. Tell me. Hit me up.
Hey, the whole day. I guess some people would go and like lounge on a beach or be like, can I get to Hawaii by then? I'm hanging out with friends. I'm trying to make a lot of jokes. A
Okay.
lot of jokes, and there's going to be some day drinking. And when you're day drinking at my age, you can't just stop in the afternoon because you're going to take a nap
No, you got to keep going. You got to push through.
So we're going the whole day. But the focus meal is a burger, and with burger, probably just a pale ale, not even an IPA. Like, just give me something in that 5.5% alcohol range that's like balanced and not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Pale ale, a great smash burger with grilled onions or caramelized onions, good fries, and then I'm gonna have some kind of dessert, ideally shared with Bud.
Okay.
Maybe we order two or three things on the menu, and then all four of us eat it, something like that.
Yep.
And then we're drinking some neat whiskey after dinner.
That's cool.
Until the end. Yeah.
Awesome. That's a good answer. I'm always surprised. No matter what, I'm always surprised at what everybody says. And most of the time it's like, it's simple. It's not
overthinking.
It's not a big thing. Yeah.
Have a chicken orange.
Yeah. It's like, I'm just eating foie gras. That's all I'm doing. Fuck it. Stuff me with goose liver. I'm done. Well, thank you so much, Max. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Very much.
Tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
Yeah. So if you live in Maryland, visit your local liquor store. Hopefully they already carry a selection of our spirits. And if they don't, it goes a long way if you ask them to, so that they know people want it, because generally that's their only hold up. If I go in there and ask if they want it, they don't know if their customers want it. So go ask your local liquor store in Maryland. If you're outside of the state, Sealbox and Hop Cask and Barrel and Sherry's are all online retailers that carry our spirits and can ship to something like 38 states out there. So if you're not local and you are lucky enough to live in one of the 38, a lot of this stuff is still available to you. So do us a favor and check out a bottle. If you want John's favorite, the Toasted is definitely out there and is really special. That's the newest one on the market. So super excited about that. Find us on social at Balt Spirits Co. across all platforms. I don't do TikTok, but I'm on the Gram and the Face Space, Twitter, although Facebook and Twitter mostly just get fed the occasional newsletter and whatever I'm doing on Instagram. Then you can reach out to me directly via the website for all of your in-depth question needs, or come visit me in the tasting room. I kind of live there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Max. I really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to the Rude Cooking School podcast. You can find us. We have a Facebook group. Add yourself. And if you like this, you'll be in the one space in Facebook that is not a piece of shit. Everyone's really nice. We share funny stories and recipes and dumb memes and are idiots together. And it's really fun. Come do it. As you've seen, we are pretty much anywhere where you can get podcasts at. So wherever you are listening to us right now, go to that site or that app and rate and review us if possible. And that's a really big help. Tell your friends about us. We don't pay for advertising, so word of mouth is really important to us. And I have seen you, Sweden. I have seen you. Yeah, I've seen the numbers going up. Thank you very much for telling people in Sweden. I don't know why, but sure, let's do that. And that's it. I will see you guys next week on the Rude Cooking School podcast. So at the end here, I'm your host, John Hauser III. Don't yuck my yum. And you are?
Max Lents, Baltimore Spirits Company.
There you go. Thanks, everybody. See you later, Max. Peace.